Good morning, students. Today we will discuss lecture method as teaching strategy. A teaching method comprises the principle and method used by teacher to enable student learning. These strategies are determined partially on the subject matter to be taught and partially by the nature of the learner. For a particular teaching method to be appropriate and efficient, it has been be relation with the characteristics of learner and the types of learning is to be supposed to bring out. Suggestion are there is to design and selecting the teaching method must take into account not only the nature of the subject matter but also how students learn in total school. The turn is that the encourages must creativity. It is no fact that human advancement come through the uh, reasoning. uh, as you know, teach, teaching method can be broadly divided in two categories: learner center method and teacher center method. Lecture method is one type of teacher center method. In teacher center method, all activities goes around to the teacher, and student passive learner in teacher center method. In learner center method, or we can say participatory method, all activities goes around to student, and is the based on the theory of learning by doing. Nowadays, uh, learner center method are more popular. We will discuss first the objective of lecture method. To understand the concept of lecture method, to acknowledge the use of lecture method, a student will be able to analyze and understand lecture method. A student will be able to know the importance of lecture method, to identify the steps, or we can say principle of lecture method. Lecture method of teaching is the oldest teaching method applied in educational institutions. This teaching method is one way channel of communication of information. Student involvement in this teaching method is just to listen and sometime pen down some notes if necessary during the lecture. Combine the information and organize it. In my slide, you are watching that teacher is active. Teacher give his lecture using blackboard. So In lecture method, necessary to use blackboard, audiovisual aid to improve student learning, to improve teaching learning process. The influence of good teacher can never be erased. This is very good quotation for teacher. So teacher should have lot of skills and competency to improve teaching learning process. Lecture method is most commonly used method of teaching social science. It is a teacher control information center approaches in which the teacher works as a solo resource in classroom instruction. In lecture method, only the teacher talks and student are passive listener. Since the student do not actively participate in this method of teaching, this is a teacher control and information center. Sometimes teacher ask a question to know whether the student are getting knowledge or not. So teacher should ask a question in lecture method to improve uh, learning process. In the field of education, lecture method is used very frequently. This method is used in order to acquire knowledge and concept. Lecture method mainly focus on the cognitive objectives. The main emphasis of this strategy is the presentation of the content. In this method, teacher plan and controls the whole teaching learning process. Lecture method is most commonly followed in colleges and school in the big classes. It is not suitable for primary classes. For primary classes, use learner center teaching method, not teacher center teaching method. Uh, this method is not quite suitable to realize the real aim of teaching science, because in science is a practical subject, so only listen things and subject not complete the learning. Now we will discuss Principle of lecture method. A student can learn better through listening because he uses his senses. As you know, whenever student uses his all senses, he will and learn more and remain uh, things in his or her memory. Through lecture method, the teacher makes an attempt to impart perfect and complete knowledge of the subject or the topics of a student. Subject matter can be controlled or correlated with other subject. New knowledge is given related to previous knowledge. These are the four principles of lecture method. When to use lecture method? It is used to give an overview of large unit. This method is an effective way to for motivating pupils and developing their interest in the subject. It is used for supplementing the pupils' reading and clarifying main concept. This method help to solve this the time of students by providing important information in short time period. This method is used to provide knowledge. So I think you understand when the lecture method used. It is basically depend on the uh, teacher quality, ability, and interest also, and also depend on the subject matter. So these are the general point to when to use lecture method, but also other things also consider in your mind. Vasley, Idiger, B. Wronski, Stanley suggests that the lecture method serves four basic purposes: to motivate, to clarify, to review, to expand. To motivate the student for learning, do better, clarify the subject matter, and to review and expand. These are the four basic purpose of using lecture method. Steps of lecture method. First step is preparation for the lecture. This include silent point like appropriate language and manner of presentation according to the nature of the student. Selection of the audio, visual aids, and instructional material. Planning the motivational technique. Anticipating criteria, difficulties, and problem during the lecture. Finding suitable solution and alternative to these barrier to a successful lecture. So these are the key point whenever you prepare your lecture. First is use appropriate language and prepare your lecture in a systematic manner and according to your nature, student nature. बहुत हमेशा इसमें अरेंजमेंट को करते हैं जब हम लेक्चर मेथड को इजी टू हार्ड, मतलब सरल से कठिन की ओर जाना चाहिए और सभी बच्चों को ध्यान में रखकर एग्जाम्पल इंक्लूड करने चाहिए, बीच बीच में क्वेश्चन इंक्लूड करने चाहिए और हाउ टू मोटिवेट आवर स्टूडेंट उसमें भी फोकस करना चाहिए और हमेशा जो मोटिवेशन के जो शब्द हैं वो बदल बदल कर प्रयोग करना चाहिए। हार्ड क्वेश्चन पर हार्ड उस पर अच्छा मोटिवेशन देना चाहिए, सेम मोटिवेशन कभी नहीं यूज करना चाहिए। These are the preparation for the lecture method. Introduction to the lecture. It should be done briefly, and if it is executed properly, it can initially kill off the enthusiasm of the student. So, introduction of the lecture should be proper. Giving the body of the lecture, the teacher should have a given cognitive framework upon which he relies to achieve a more logical presentation. So, arrange your lecture in a logical way according to the student, according to your subject matter, according to the quality and ability of teacher. Fourth steps is conclusion of the lecture. Following technique can be used to wrap up the lecture, summarizing the major points presented, forming generalization, giving implications. Whenever you close closer whenever you use closer of your lecture, you should remember these point in your mind. Now we will discuss planning the lecture. Before starting to prepare a lecture, the teacher must be able to answer four basic questions. Who is your audience? What is the purpose of your lecture? Why you use this topic for giving lecture? How much time is available? It means how much time you have to deliver your lecture. It means uh, collect all point according to your time, your audience, and purpose of the lecture. What is the subject matter? What is the subject matter you use for giving lecture? Always uh, ask four questions before choosing subject, choosing lecture method. Purpose of lecture method. The objectives of lecture may be to give general information on a subject, gain expectation for a new point of view, change basic attitude, teach particular scale. So these are the purpose of using lecture method. Situation where the lecture method can be used. In the introduction of a new topic, in the introduction of new instrument, revising and summarizing lesson, uh, covering the syllabus quickly. Generally, in higher classes, we use lecture method because we have very short time and we have to cover all syllabus. So generally, we use lecture method. Presenting the history of planets and animal, It means whenever we covering the plants and animal, all these things we are using lecture method. These are the situation when we are using lecture method. A good lecture must take care of all these uh, points. Time available, the audience, subject matter, procedure, appearances, manner, gesture, voice, vocabulary, and use of audio visual aids and blackboard. Always use appropriate audio visual aid according to your topic, and use blackboard for hard word, key point, and explain the things. Uh, your voice should be uh, clear and loud, because we all know lecture method is generally used in large amount of audience. So remember all these things and cover your lecture within a given time. As you are watching in my PPT, first is time. What kind of audience? It means senior students and adults and other. What is the subject matter and procedure? And next slide. Appearances, manner, gesture, voice, vocabulary, use audio video aids and blackboard. By this PPT, you understand the these all point. Organizing the lecture. First one is aim. What is the aim of particular topic? Introduction. Give introduction of the uh, particular topic. Body of the topic. Example, discussion, demonstration, illustration. Divide in lecture body should be divided in two parts, and question and conclusion. So this is the way to organize your lecture in a proper way. How to evaluate a lecture? The speaker content expertise, The language used, the degree of transparency of presentation, use of audio visual aids, attention and intellectual presentation of pupils. So these are the key points to evaluate lecture. And evaluation: outstanding, excellent, very good, average, below average. So these are the rating scales to use. Now we will discuss advantage of lecture method. After advantage of lecture method, we will discuss disadvantage of lecture method. It is quite economical method because it is possible to handle a large number of students at a time. No laboratory equipments, aids, material are required. So this is the best quality of lecture method because a large number of students can be handled at a time. Using this method, the knowledge can be imparted to students quickly and prescribed syllabus can be covered in a short time. It develops good audience habit. Through this method, new subject matter can be easily introduced. It enables linkage between previous knowledge with a new one. It is quite attractive and easy to follow, and also by this method teacher can develop his own style of teaching and exposition. It helps in achieving even high order cognitive objective, is that application, analysis and synthesis. Lecture method present the subject matter in a systematic way. It is simplify the task of teacher as she dominate the lesson of 70 to 80% of the lesson time. Student just listen to him. Sometime good lecture delivered by the teacher may motivate, instigate and inspire a student for creative thinking. After a lot of advantage, now we will discuss disadvantage of this method. In this method, the student participation is negligible and student comes passive recipient of information. This is the main disadvantage of a lecture method. So you should use some question between of your lecture to you should avoid this types of uh, disadvantage of lecture method. In this method, we are never sure if the student are concentrating and understanding the subject matter being taught to them by teacher. So this is the second main disadvantage of our lecture method. In this method, knowledge is imparted so rapidly that the weak student develop a hatred for learning. In this method, there is a no place of learning by doing because it is a teacher centered method, and thus teaching by this method strike at the very root of science. In lecture method, all activities goes around to the teacher, and this is not based on the learning by uh, doing theory. It does not take into the account of the previous knowledge of a student, and it does not take care of individual need and difference of student, because lecture method generally depend on the teacher ability, teacher quality, teacher competency, and teacher skills and subject matter, knowledge of the subject matter. It is not depend on the quality of the learner or other things. So this is the main disadvantage of lecture method. In case of physics, it is against sprite to develop of scientific attitude, as physics is basically an experimental science. It is an undemocratic and unauthorized method, as a student cannot challenges or question the verdict of the teacher. In my slide, you are watching uh, and first one, teacher is violent, and next slide you are watching frustrated teacher. So this is also the main disadvantage of mm, our lecture method. It does not provide for correct feedback and remedial help to solve the learner problem. It does not help to inculcate scientific attitude and training and scientific method among the pupils. So this is not allowed. Why, what, how, say, whom, why is, why. This is the all the scientific method we are using to clarify our knowledge. Now we will discuss conclusion of our lecture method. This method is suitable for teaching in higher classes where we aim to cover the prescribed syllabus quickly, and also this method will help them to prepare themselves for a college where lecture method of teaching is dominant method of imparting instruction. And also whenever we have large amount of audience, then we are using lecture method. This method of teaching can be made more beneficial if the teacher encourages his student to take note during the lesson. So whenever student take notes during the lesson, he and she can use maximum इंद्रियों को काम में ले रहा है, कानों से सुन रहा है, आंखों से देख रहा है, हाथों से लिख रहा है. तो ये लेक्चर मेथड को हम इम्प्रूव करने के लिए यूज कर सकते हैं, बिकॉज whenever we using our maximum senses for learning, the learning should be fast and retained in our mind. After the lesson, teacher can give his student something, some time for asking questions and answer their queries without any hesitation. If the teacher can introduce some humor in his lesson, it will be keep student int- interested in his lesson. Sometime use related story of the content and other humors. So student have fun. So student learn more and student enjoy your lecture. These are the resources for further more detailed study. You should go through to study more about lecture method. Now, a good teacher explain, a superior teacher demonstrate, a great teacher inspire us to do good. So now time of MCQs. The rule of presenting the content to make them easy are called method of teaching, maximize of teaching, techniques of teaching, teaching strategy. Choose appropriate answer and send me on my comment box. Students are passive in project method, discovery method, lecture method, inquiry method. You have four options. Choose appropriate option and send me. Student explore the information themselves in lecture method, discovery method, both, none. Teacher explain in lecture method, discovery method, demonstration method, problem and solving method. So give your answer. You have four options. Which is more suitable in teaching of history? Lecture method, demonstration method, discussion method, and project method. Which is the best method of teaching at secondary level? Lecture method, analytical method, direct, and demonstration method. Choose. You have four options. Choose appropriate answer. Thank you, student. You listen me very patiently and send your answer in my comment box.